Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
Australian men and women are retiring on average with substantially different superannuation balances. Now there's a push in Canberra to tackle what's known as the gender super gap. Last week, Liberal Senator Jane Hume introduced a bill that would allow couples to split their super without facing additional taxes, with the goal of improving financial outcomes for women and gender equity among ageing Australians. In today's deep dive, we'll give you a snapshot of where Australia's super gap is at and explain everything you need to know about this proposed legislation.
What an interesting topic to discuss, Em. I feel like superannuation, it's one of those things that we know is coming many, many decades away for most of us and for most of us listening. But the decisions that are made on how it works now will really make an impact in our later years.
Yep.
So why don't we start right at the basics? Give me the elevator pitch for superannuation in Australia.
Yes, so super is money set aside for retirement from your pay. Basically, your employer has to make mandatory contributions out of your salary, but in most cases, this is not money that you can just access willy-nilly. Most of us won't be able to get this money until we turn 60. Every employer in Australia, like I said, is legally required to make super contributions for their staff. Case in point, you, Sam, as a co-founder, you would be all over this. The whole system basically is designed so that when Aussies retire, we can support ourselves without putting too much strain on welfare payments and the welfare system, so things like the aged pension. But the gender gap when it comes to super is significant. So in the years approaching retirement age, the gender super gap can be anywhere between 22 and 35%.
Wow.
But on average, women in Australia right now are retiring with about 25% less superannuation than men, and that translates to an estimated $52,000 less on average for women entering retirement. So the median super balance for men aged 60 to 64 is over $204,000, whereas for women in that same group, it's about $147,000.
That's a pretty significant gap.
Yeah.
It's definitely one that surprised me when you rolled out those numbers. Why exactly is that gap there?
Look, there are many reasons and they're all quite interconnected, but the leading factor for our super gender gap is really about women being more likely to take time out of the workforce to be the primary carer for young children. So that can include long stretches that are career breaks, that can include maternity leave. And basically there's this compounding effect created by that, where not only women are missing out on super contributions during their time away from work, but they're also missing out on the investment returns on those contributions over several decades. So there are kind of many revenue streams that are impacted by this.
And the point there is that $1 now into your superannuation account that gets invested by your super fund, and that dollar probably could be $4 or $5 when you retire.
Exactly.
Got it.
Women are also more likely to work part-time than men, so that impacts their earning power, which impacts their super earning power. And they're also more likely to take more time out of paid work than men to care for elderly relatives. So there is this kind of gender care gap as well. But, you know, when we're talking super pay gaps, it has to come from as well a broader gender pay gap to consider. So on average, women earn nearly 23% less than men and are generally underrepresented in management. So women have this pay gap. There's also more limits on their opportunities to make bigger salaries. And I guess what you need to know is that in Australia, for every dollar on average that a man makes, women earn 78 cents. And since super is calculated as a percentage of your salary, lower wages mean proportionally smaller super contributions over a working lifetime.
And so we talk a lot about closing that gender pay gap and the various initiatives that are attempting over the last kind of, I'd say, 30, 40 years trying to close that gap.
Yeah.
But what then are the longer term impacts of the gender super gap?
Yeah. So apart from the obvious kind of gender equity argument here, you know, what is right and fair? How do we improve outcomes for all Australians, including women, to make things better and fairer? There's also an important financial and welfare strain that comes from a super gap. So individuals with low super balances are more likely to need the age pension in retirement.
Right.
So if you don't have a healthy super, you're going to need welfare assistance. That is at a cost to the government and the taxpayer. And I guess it's not really a surprise then to know that women make up around 55 to 56% of aged pension recipients. So we have an aged pension gender gap. Plus, women live longer than men. That is a fact. On average, women do live longer. So you could argue that means, women need even more cash when they retire, if not, equal to men, but more super than men to ensure that they can actually support themselves for the rest of their lives.
And so we're talking about this on the pod today because Liberal Senator Jane Hume has put forward a solution. She's come up with an idea to try and narrow this gender super gap.
Yep.
Talk me through it.
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
So Jane Hume has put forward this bill that would allow couples to split their superannuation savings with no additional tax penalties. Now, under this proposal, the partner with the most super could transfer up to $2 million from their fund to their partners.
Right.
Now, currently, there are pretty significant tax implications for most super transfers.
Okay.
So this would get rid of that, make it easier, cheaper, faster to transfer between funds. Jane Hume calls it a simple and voluntary mechanism for fairness to tackle one of the most persistent and unfair challenges in our superannuation system. This would probably be most helpful or particularly helpful for a traditional family setup where we've got a partner who's worked full-time for their whole careers while another partner has been a primary carer for their children or for elderly relatives and have missed out on super there. So under this plan, both partners in this instance would enter retirement with more balanced savings, improving financial security for the lower earning partner.
Right.
But it's not a perfect plan. Critics have noted that this proposal doesn't include any plans to overhaul workplace inequalities or equalise caring responsibilities.
Yeah, interesting.
And the legislation really is specifically designed for married or de facto couples. So you could argue when those couples retire, they're going to be sharing in the same super anyway, and it leaves out single women. We know single women retire with less super than men, and this legislation doesn't really do anything for that group.
I noticed when you were introducing this to us, you were very careful to say Jane Hume's policy, not the coalition's policy. Is there a reason for that choice of language? And is Hume now pushing this independently?
Yes, so this is actually a private bill. This is a proposal from Jane Hume, a Liberal senator, but that doesn't mean it is an official policy position being put forward by the coalition. So she is pressing ahead with this agenda independently, as you suggested, Sam, but she has said that she's raised the policy in the Nationals party room and that she does have some support from MPs and senators. They've not been named, though. Hume has conceded that she's not really expecting this issue to be high on the agenda at the upcoming federal election, but she would advocate for the policy if the coalition wins government.
Yeah.
So to be very clear, that doesn't mean the coalition would automatically adopt this policy. It's just something that Hume would push for.
And she's planted that seed pretty early because the next federal election is still kind of, 2.5 years away.
Exactly.
So giving her a long runway into turning this into a discussion for the country. Does it have any opposition as an idea? Are there other ideas on the table when it comes to levelling out this super gap?
Yeah, the Albanese government has taken a different approach to try to resolve this gap. And one of the big policy areas there is relating to changes to paid parental leave. So this year we saw superannuation added to paid parental leave. So for the first time, so if you receive paid parental leave entitlements, 12% super will be paid on top of that. So that came in from 1 July this year.
And if you think about the core reasons that you gave earlier in terms of why that gap exists and the time off work and some of those reasons, that's kind of countering that head on.
Yeah, and Labor says essentially that this is going to boost the super balances of around 180 families each year. Paid parental leave does go up to 26 weeks next year, and from that point, these super contributions will be worth more than $3,000 per person. The government has also legislated the publication of gender pay gaps for large companies. So the Workplace Gender Equality Agency now reports very transparently on pay gaps. There are mandatory reporting standards for all employers that give us a better sense of where the pay gap is at and, put more pressure on employers to address disparities.
So it's kind of a bit of a multi-pronged attack from both the government and the opposition. It's clear that both sides of the aisle are thinking about this as a core issue. That's the political response. I'd like to quickly turn to the industry response. The superannuation industry itself is very powerful and has a lot of say in how these types of programs roll out. Have we heard from industry groups?
Yeah, so there are a couple of other ideas being put forward. As you mentioned, this is a kind of pronged approach, but the Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia was in support of compulsory super on paid parental leave. They advocated for that before those reforms came in a couple of months ago. And separately, the Association of Super Funds has proposed a super baby bonus. So this would involve the government depositing $5,000 into the super accounts of women when they give birth to a child.
Wow.
So that's a really interesting conversation that's going on. Now, from the business world, we have KPMG, who has proposed catch-up super concessions for carers. So these would allow people who've taken time out of the workforce for caring responsibilities, as we've discussed, to make higher contributions later when they return to work. So a couple of interesting conversations, I suppose, ongoing.
And so give me a sense of what happens from here. We have one member of the opposition coming forward with this private bill. That's Jane Hume.
Yeah.
Is it likely to become a thing?
Look, it is unlikely, as with many private bills, for this to become law. It would need the support of the government, and that seems unlikely at this stage, given how recently they introduced super on paid parental leave and also given how recently super contributions increased. So Labor has its own approach clearly on this, and they might see that as sufficient for now. So I don't think Jane Hume is going to get this one over the line immediately, but there's certainly an ongoing discussion around what we can do to improve outcomes for women when they retire.
I think these topics are good when they don't necessarily correlate directly to a law that's here and now, but keeps conversations moving, keeps us thinking of options that are out there on the table. And I think it's probably a case of politics working well, which is quite rare.
Fancy that.
And that's all we've got for you on today's episode of The Daily Aus. We're going to be back in the afternoon with your headlines. Until then, have a great start to the week.